Hey, this is a new video. Decided to drop one on my channel where we'll be, I guess, critiquing comic book readers' Fate's Day Night Servants ranked according to power. I actually came across this around a year ago. A lot of my friends will remember me making fun of this when it originally rolled around. Um, and I remember back then when I was first getting into Nazi versus power scaling, I actually came across this, and that's why I'm like, man, this is trash. Like, this is pretty bad. It's not the worst thing in the world. Looking back over it, I feel like at the time I was a bit harsh with my critiques, but I wanted to just kind of go back over it and kind of review the content. I think the content itself is kind of what's at fault. Someone is currently like, sounds like they're strangling a chicken. So if you hear the strangling chicken, comment strangling chicken in the comments below. Tell me with that algorithm. But memes aside, uh, this is the thing. You could see the link up there if you want to actually go check this out yourself. I'm just gonna go over this and just kind of talk about the content itself. I'm actually not gonna critique the top 10. Ranking the servants is kind of hard and putting them in like a numerical order. Granted, this guy didn't do it the best, but like I feel like that's like my least of my issues. And maybe I'll bring up something like here or there about the numbering, but like it's more just kind of talking about just like the content. So he starts here, and he's basically like, let's have like an good old fashioned like beatdown fest, right? Like this is put them in a cage, you put them in an arena, and they're gonna fight each other, right? They're gonna have to duke it out, and then you're like, basically that's what he's saying, right? That's it. That's he has this weird line where he says, "What happens if we get rid of all their abilities?" And then they just like fight. And that's really weird because, like, if you got rid of all of their abilities, then, like, Saber is, like, a frail girl, but with Mana Burst and Dragon's Core, she becomes, like, a beyond superhuman, can cut buildings in half, like, so, like, I really don't understand what this line's about. And even then, like, he still kind of ignores this line and then, like, doubles down on it later. But, with that out of the way, like, it's just, Avenger for number 10. He includes Avenger, even though Avenger's not really in the war. There actually is 10 servants in the Stay Night Holy Grail war if you count Saber and Saber Altar as separate, which they kind of are. But he counts Avenger and he doesn't have Saber Altar in this list, so factoring that out, he basically just says like, oh yeah, he taints the Grail, but he's terrible because he read the whole meme that like 0-star servant. He's a meme. Understandable, like he they say he's just barely above normal human in comparison, which is like, that's really not true. Like, that's actually like massively downplaying Avengers like A rank speed, which is, according to Archer, faster than he could like physically see in his fight with Lancer, where Lancer goes all out in speed. Archer's like, he had to use Mind's Eye to react in time. So like, kind of sauce that they would say that like he's weaker than like a normal, like almost as bad as like a human level. He also can kill humans like hecka easily even, according to my grammar. Like he blitzes entire households. Like if he was human level, like a group of people would like destroy him. So this is just wrong. This is just like a bad statement. Absolutely wrong. His abilities have huge drawbacks. I think they're talking about how Avesta he needs to take damage before it goes into effect. Which is like, whatever, right? That's what an Avesta is. His Avesta is inherently weak. Not the drawback isn't really a problem. Counter spells aren't bad. It's just like his counter curse is actually kind of garbage because the counter is kind of weak in comparison to the damage he has to take. Anyway, that's just number 10. Let's talk about Caster. This is Caster has a barrel of tricks that makes her hard to deal with. She has several strong magic spells and can amplify people around her. And she has Rule Breaker. Basically, that's it. And then he goes on to say that, like, in Raw Power, she gets destroyed by Rin, in which they say gave her the Kung Fu Hustle and beat her within an inch of her life. And then they're like, oh, but like, yeah, that she like still won the fight, but her pride, like, yeah, she had to be saved by her master, like, fought her. This is pretty garbage. Like this entire this entire one is really bad compared to like the other ones. So basically, it's like, oh yeah, she has the ability, she has like strong magic powers, but they don't state any of them. Like Caster can like freeze time, teleport. What else? Her strengthening put Soichiro on like servant level, which is pretty nuts. And like, don't get me wrong, like this whole statement about Rin using the quote unquote kung fu hustle, isn't necessarily wrong. Rin, when using her Baji Quan that she learned from a Baji Quan master Kirei, while amped by her like top tier magic crest, was able to beat like Caster. But that was, you're also talking about like Rin, just like kind of a prodigy. But still, though, the fact that they don't bring up like literally anything they can do, or she can do, is kind of like sauce. And then they're like, and they talk about this raw power thing again. Like, what is this, like an arm wrestling match? Like, is he ranking the servants on how well they can arm wrestle? Which I feel like it's almost like that one like Hunter x Hunter thing where like the Phantom Troop members had like an arm wrestling contest and like Uvogin got on top, right? That doesn't mean Uvogin's inherently just better than Crollo. I know that's like off topic, but like it's the same thing applies here. Like just because someone can beat you in an arm wrestling match, like pretend you're wrestling like your stronger friend, right? Like this muscular guy who does like thousands of push-ups every day, and he like destroys you in arm wrestling. But if you have like a shotgun, like you're going to beat him because you have a shotgun. It doesn't matter how physically strong you are. If you could shoot him with a shotgun, he is dead. That's just kind of how it is, and I feel like that's like this weird raw power argument is kind of dumb. I wanted to bring that up. True Assassin's next. They're like, oh yeah, he's an awesome servant who could fight from the sides. And then it's like, too bad not everyone can utilize him to his full ability. And then it's just like it goes on to say like his parameters are like all like they're lying to you, and like he's not that strong. Because if you don't know, True Assassin's parameters are like B rank strength, like A rank agility. He's actually beefy, like pretty strong, and that's not lying to you. Those are his parameters. That's just canon lore. Like that's like you can't like argue that they're lying to you. What makes him lose is that he's not a combat specialist. He's an assassin. Like sure, if you can know how to assassinate somebody, like okay, that's one thing. But put an assassin in a room with someone who's like been training for like millennia, like the fight with Archer where Archer kind of just bodies him. It's because Archer has more combat experience. Archer knows how to fight in a battle more, while Assassin is obviously good for assassinating. Like, I know it's stupid, but I feel like that shouldn't be like stated like, oh, his parameters don't matter. They do matter, and if someone sat still and let him punch him with his cursed arm, yeah, he'd do a ton of damage. Move aside. This is a pretty okay placement. Like he's weaker than most of the other servants, and I agree with that. Speaking of, next up is Actual Assassin. They actually talk about how he's not really a servant and he's actually a wraith, which is surprisingly intelligent for a list that I felt like is kind of bad. And they're like, oh yeah, he's stuck to Ryudo Temple, which isn't that bad because this is weird though, because while they talk about some of the fact that he's wraith and everything, basically they talk about how his swordsmanship is like kind of top notch, but they also talk about like how he gets amped by the staircase, he gets amped by Caster's anti-sorcery barrier, And then I'm like, why would you bring, like, if you're talking about ranking a character solely on what they can do, like, why would you talk about with, like, all these amps? Like, this should go in caster's favor, not assassins. And then he says, oh yeah, he's able to keep up with Saber. It's weird because most people forget that, like, every fight he has with Saber in both Stay Night and, like, the UBW interpretations, he's fighting, like, nerfed, like, beta Shiro Saber, can't get mana, lower parameters, no Avalon, and that Saber still manages to beat him. I think for this point, like, they don't bring up, like, his Tsubame Gaishi, which is literally second magic, which is kind of crazy, but they don't bring that up. And then they say, like, yeah, other battle-oriented servants would beat him. That's fair. Like, most of this stuff is fair. I just feel like it's really weird. He's just talking about caster for, like, 90% of his thing. They don't talk about, like, his swordsman style, where, like, he's constantly adapting and learning to how the opponent fights. Like, that's all pretty good. But they don't bring that up, so... Yeah! Gilgamesh is at number 6. Oh, dear. Like Gilgamesh, I need a drink of wine to handle this one. So, this is the most, like, bipolar one, because if you read it, it's like, pound for pound, Gilgamesh would win the Holy Grail War, but then when you factor out all of his abilities and powerful noble phantasm, he would lose. And then they're like, yeah, and then they go on to say, like, Gilgamesh never focused on any one sort of skill, and thus he's, like, a jack of all trades and a master of none. And then he'd get overpowered. And then he's like, oh yeah, like, it gets apparent at close range he has nothing to most combat servants. This whole thing, this whole part is really, really dumb. Because at first he states, like, oh, Gilgamesh is broken. And then he's like, but if we strip Gilgamesh of literally everything, he loses. And I'm gonna make another analogy, because that's how I, like, kind of convey things. If you're in a war, and you all have, like, guns and weapons, right? If you just strip someone, pretend you strip, like, a super soldier of all of his weapons, and you leave a normal soldier with a gun. Like, super soldier as in, like, he's not, like, superhuman, but he's, like, top tier in terms of, like, really athletic compared to the other soldiers. The soldiers with guns are still gonna win. That's my analogy I kind of end up using, because, like, why would you basically be like, well, yeah, he's the strongest, but if you take away everything that makes him strong, he's weak? Like, well, yeah, no crap, dude. Like, that's kind of, like, why would you say that? What's the point in that? This whole, like, oh, he's a master of none. It's like that line Shiro brings up. It's clear this guy watched the UBW fight and was like, oh, so Gilgamesh is weak. And, like, I don't really understand what's up with Gil being here. His close-up combat isn't bad. It's stated by Shiro while he's in Unlimited Blade Works. If Gil recomposed himself, he would have lost. Because Gilgamesh would have been like, wait a minute. I'm way stronger. But the fact that a human was pushing him, even a little bit, actually scared Gil. Which they also don't mention, because of course they don't. Because they never probably read the VN. Knowing this. I mean, do they not, like... I really don't know what else to say. Like, why would you say, like, taking out all of his noble phantasms? So, like, oh, yeah, Gilgamesh without noble phantasms, I guess. And yet you talk about Rule Breaker and talk about the other stuff. Because they bring up Avengers NP and his huge drawbacks. They bring up his abilities have huge drawbacks. Why would you bring up his abilities, but then all of a sudden just retcon that and be like, nah, we're not talking about Gilgamesh's abilities. It's dumb. It's dumb. Moving on. So Archer is like, oh, he has tons of weapons. And then they compare him to Batman, where, like, if he has prep time, with prep time, he could, like, he's a huge problem. I don't get that, though, because Archer doesn't really set traps. Like what's his prep time? Jumping away and shooting an arrow. He's a jack of all trades, and then it says like Archer scales above Gilgamesh because of close range combat, but like he's using Concho and Bakia in close range combat. So like, what now? We're suddenly counting in projection and abilities. And then it says it gives him a clear advantage. Gilgamesh isn't a slouch at close quarters of combat. He just doesn't really. He's never really felt like he needed to. Like, there's this huge conception, like, oh, Gil doesn't, like, he's, like awful at sword fighting. Like, sure, if you compare him to someone like Saber, who has, like, intuition and, like, a ton of other stuff. But I don't understand this either, because if you want to talk about raw Unga Bunga, Archer has, like, D rank strength. Gilgamesh has B. So, like, if this is the arm wrestling contest in terms of raw power, according to them, Archer would lose. It's just really weird. I don't understand what this list is going for. Surprisingly, you see Ryder in 4 out of 10, which is kind of crazy because you'd expect them to only watch Unlimited Blade Works, and thus they would have put her in like number 10 because she got bodied by Caster. So she has Petrifying Eyes, Pegasus, and Monstrous Strength. Okay, so then they talk about abilities again. Like, they constantly go back and forth on this stupid thing. But I actually don't have a problem with Ryder's placement. I do think Ryder is one of the strongest servants in the Grail War. But what really bugs me, they say like the Ryder relies on her agility than raw strength, which is kind of dumb because Max Power Ryder has the same strength stat as Gilgamesh, not counting monstrous strength, which probably amps it to like A rank, if not maybe more. So that's dumb. And then the feat they say for how strong Ryder is, right? So you would think like, okay, they're gonna reference like her fighting Salter, like the whole battle where like she fights this titanic servant by herself for like 10-15 minutes. And then they're like, nah, remember that time she shot a spike through Shiro's arm and then effortlessly dragged him around? Like that's some real power. Like, this is so dumb. Like, I can't even tell if he's trying to make a funny quip or if this is legitimate. They're basically stating that, like, Shiro being impaled is, like, the equivalent of, like, oh my goodness. Like, that's so strong. Which, do they not remember the bad end where, like, Caster fires a, like, massive hole through Shiro's body? Do they not remember True Assassin punching a massive hole through Lancer's chest? Like, Gilgamesh making Sakura look like a pincushion, like, all these things that, like, happen. Like, this is the thing you bring up, like, the raw power to punch a hole in Shiro's, like, forearm. Not even, like, dissect it off his body. Just poke a hole in it. Okay, moving on. Kuholin, which I'm pretty sure is how you pronounce it. Could be wrong. I'm still getting used to it. He has excellent speed, strength, and agility. He's pretty good at fighting. This is just okay. They say he has to be super close, thanks to him being, like, give him, like, a disadvantage being a spear user. But they say he's fast. Like, this is alright. Like, he is strong and very fast and has, like, really high reflexes. Like, that is Lancer's thing. I can't disagree. But, like, the weird thing is, like, they're like, oh, he doesn't have range. Which is dumb, because, like, did you watch, like, he can his noble phantasms to literally toss his spear, and then it becomes like a carpet bomb. Or did that scene in Heaven's Feel? I think it was in the movie. I cannot remember off the top of my head if it was in the VN. Where he chucks his spear at True Assassin, and True Assassin, like, hops out of the way. But he can, like, Thor the spear back into his hand, like teleport it back into his hand. So I think it's kind of weird that they're bringing up this close range weakness, or like the far range weakness, when he has protection from arrows as well. Like, the far range is really not a problem. But that's a little critique. This placement is actually one of the better ones. Then they have Saber here. I don't know what Saber they're talking about, but let's talk about it. She may be small, but don't underestimate her power. Blah, blah. So then they talk about Rin being being the only one to unleash her full power. That's true. In canon, she is only at full power when Rin was her master. Meaning, when you see her in Zero, when you see her with Shiro, or in Zero and with Shiro and Stay Night, she's like nerfed. Like, nerfed Saber max power. Which is a little weird because Kiritsugu's Saber is like more endurable and more agility. But her mana is like way less. And her luck is like many, many, many times less. Which actually kind of factors in. So her strength feat is like she can run up a building. And then they talk about Mana Burst. And then they talk about like Fate Zero for some reason. Like, it's weird because her strength feat is her running up the side of a building when Ryder was also kind of doing that. Like, that's her strength feat. Not like the whole statement where like Archer sees max power Saber and it's just like, yeah, this is like, I'm in shock. This is kind of nuts. And then they kind of talk about like Fate Zero. She fights Lancelot. Which is true. That's a big feat for her, because Lancelot's a dragon killer, and she has the dragon trait. So that's definitely something that we could take into account. I would say it's definitely weird that they kind of just talk about this building running thing. Like I said, it's like that whole Rider punches a hole through Shiro's arm. Like, of all the feats you could go with, not like, oh, her Excalibur leveled caster's Evil Titan in Zero, or, oh, even as with Shiro as her master, she blew a hole into Berserker's body using Mana Burst. Like, no, they just kind of, they're just like, nah, she ran up a building. Like, okay then. Berserker's number one, for however you feel like doing that. They're like, he's the almost powerful servant, he gets mad enhancement. Basically, this is the first time they actually bring up, like, yeah, he can upheave buildings effortlessly, which is true. In the movies, you see him pick up giant stone buildings, the castle, like parts of the castle, like yeet it. This is actually an okay placement, where like they talk about, wow, he has crazy strength, and his attacks are so strong that even if someone were to guard them, they'd probably hurt them, which is also canon, as stated when Berserker was fighting Saber. And then they talk about, like, yeah, he has a big magic cost, though, because he's, like, he spends so much mana because he's so beefy. All in all, like, if you put, like, a gun to my head, like, this isn't the worst thing ever. Like, if you thought this was, like, if I was talking about it, I do think it's pretty bad, and their logic and reasoning is super weird, like, for Gilgamesh being in 6th, and then proceeding to talk about, like, they don't really bring up noble phantasms. Oddly, like, they do sometimes, but I still think, like, this list is kind of strange. It's not as bad as I remember, but, like, there's a lot of stuff in it that's just, like, outright flawed. It's definitely not how I would construct the top 10 servant list, though I will say that, like, his general placements are okay. Like, pretending we're not counting Avenger, because that's kind of, why would we count Avenger? Why would we count Avenger? I would agree that the caster and assassins are, like, kind of low archer, rider, and lancer kind of in the middle, and then the top would be like saber, berserker, and Gil. But for some reason, Gil's down here. That's like to me the only number placement that doesn't really make sense at all, even from like a subjective point of view, is like Gilgamesh. I can't see how anyone watched Fate Stay Night or Zero and was like, yeah, Gilgamesh is 6th place. I know this, like, another writer, a comic book reader, did, he ranked the Fate Zero servants. That one was actually pretty okay. I remember, like, he kind of just talks briefly about the character and brings up their noble phantasm, which was, like, infinitely better when what this guy does. It's weird because it seemed like he only watched, like, UBW, and thus he doesn't have, like, a lot of reference for, like, how strong any of these characters are. But, I mean, it is what it is. A little bit of a shorter video today. Thanks for tuning in. Just kind of wanted to share this kind of odd scaling tier list because I thought it was kind of funny. I'll catch y'all later. See ya.